Thank you, Wayne. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. Thank you for your interest in this topic. I am Aditya Karkera, CDO Executive Advisor and a Fellow with the Deloitte AI Institute for Government with Deloitte Consulting. I'm excited and privileged to be leading a panel of distinguished speakers today, who I'm also proud to call my industry colleagues and friends. I want to hand it over to each of the panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and let us start with Eileen.
Good afternoon. My name is Eileen Vadreen. I am the Chief Data Officer for the Department of the Air Force, which today is 2 military services, both Air and Space Forces. Very excited to be here today.
Hey everyone, great to be here today. Nick Hart, I'm the president of an organization called the Data Foundation. We're a think tank based in Washington, D.C. that specifically advocates for the use of data to improve society. I spent most of my career actually working inside the federal government, but a lot of fun now to be on the outside working with government. So great to be here.
Thank you, Nick. On to you, Valerie.
Hey everyone, Valerie Logan with the Data Lodge. And for the last 2 years, I've been the home base for data literacy program leaders, formerly a Gartner analyst that led the research on data literacy, and am excited to be here to engage in the panel. Thanks.
Thank you, Valerie. On to you, Ed.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Ed Kelly. I'm the Chief Data Officer for the state of Texas here in Austin. Very happy to be here with this extinguished group of people. We work with agencies, state agencies, and institutions of higher education in helping them to develop their data management program. And an important component of that is the data literacy effort. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Ed. Well, welcome panelists. And again, thank you for sharing your time and your experiences and your wisdom with the audience and the listeners today. So before we go any deeper into the discussion, how about we start off with just discussing what the term data literacy means to each one of us. I know personally, in my experience, I've seen the industry use the term data literacy in a variety of ways with certain variations. So I thought it would be good if we start off our discussion with kind of level setting what the term means. And if I can go around and ask each of you to maybe give your perspective on what that term means to you. Nick, if I may start with you, please.
Sure. Well, full disclosure, I think data literacy means something different to almost everybody you ask this question to. So I expect we'll also hear a lot of different answers. The work that we do and the work of my own career, I mean, data was and is foundational to any aspect of decision making. And I think there's always this presumption that like you get this data and magically know what to do with it. And that is rarely the case. And that's not to say that people are illiterate. It's to say that there are a lot of nuances about how you use information to make decisions. So to me, data literacy is a whole sweeping package of concepts. And it includes governing information, collecting and knowing how to rigorously and with high quality collect information that can then be managed effectively. And that's all on like the supply side, the early stages. When you get to the use, I think that's where the concept of literacy gets a lot of attention. But to me, that's only a piece of the puzzle. Yet it's very, very key and obviously important to being able to apply data for decision making. So understanding when particular types of data or information are relevant for certain types of decisions. And also importantly, when it's not. I live and work in Washington, D.C., and humility is not a concept that we talk about a lot in this town, but to me, that's an important aspect of getting this all right. So to me, the concept of literacy covers all of those domains and more.
Yeah, I can definitely appreciate that sentiment, Nick. It is so much more than just what the term says. Valerie, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know about you, but like when my friends and family ask me what I do for a living, I have to have like a short, really easy to answer explanation. And this is the one I give for what is data literacy. So for me, data literacy to my friends and family is how comfortable and confident are you with using data, like at work or in your life? And I'll just leave it at that. And I don't say anything more. But then the more comprehensive definition is, to me, like any kind of literacy, it's the ability to read, write, and communicate with a certain type of language to the benefit of, your work or your life. And I really like to break this down into 3 key things. That data literacy is a mindset. Data literacy involves a language. Like everybody at this conference, we're all speaking this language like it's, you know, native to everyone. And then data literacy is a set of skills of how do we think? Are we a critical thinker? How do we engage with other human beings, like telling a data story? And then how do we really apply and take decisions? So how do we think, engage, and apply? So mindset, how do we even think about this? Language and skill sets. Hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great. Eileen, may I go over to you?
I actually use the word data acumen because in the Department of the Air Force, one of our core competencies is excellence in all we do. And I really look at data literacy is really a lifelong journey in terms of building a capability. I like to say that data needs to be part of every airman and guardian's core DNA. And it begins at the tactical edge, but then as you go through your career, it gets to the strategic level. So it's not just about I achieved a certain proficiency level. It's about that lifelong commitment of building skills and maturing our skills as the technologies emerge and mature through our leadership journey. So I really believe it's a process.
Thanks, Eileen. Ed.
Well, actually, everyone stole my thunder, so I really don't have much to add, but I will add a couple of things. You know, I think it really depends on where you are in your data management journey. Here in Texas, we've recently had law passed that's going to kind of develop and establish a data management officer in all our state agencies. And these people are relatively new to this position. So I think fundamentally literacy starts with understanding common terms, and so that everybody understands that across the enterprise. So that's one. But to Valerie's point, it really is reading, understanding, and communicating and using data so that you can effectively use it for decisions. That's another part of it. And when we talk about literacy here, we talk about building those skills, as Eileen had talked about, but also getting to a point where it's not just being literate, which is an understanding of data, but getting proficient at using data. And being able to communicate it is one of the most important things, because that's what business executives need to understand as we develop and the practitioners develop the models and other things associated with the data.
Yeah, that's excellent feedback. So I'm glad we started off the discussion with this, because I know like I said, have heard variations of how the industry is using it. And sounds like each one of you have also heard variations of how you've heard others use it and how you are using it within your organizations. So it's not just the skill of being able to read, write with data. It's also about the business acumen, the technical acumen, developing those skills and being able to have that as a lifelong process, to Eileen's point. Love those perspectives. So now that we've kind of level set what the term data literacy means for us as well as for the audience, I want to move our conversation a little bit towards data literacy in the public sector specifically. So the question that comes to my mind is that government has always collected data. This is not something new. But whether you start with simple things like driver's license, social security, or some of those very basic needs around citizens. Why is the focus on data literacy today? Why are we talking about data literacy now and we haven't started that discussion earlier? So let me get straight to the point and say, what is the importance of data literacy in your mind for success of the public sector? And if I may start with you, Valerie.
Well, I think there's a few different layers if we unpack that. I mean, one and the most obvious one, I think, is we've reached a point where, first of all, CDOs are on the scene and taking ownership for data as an asset and data as a capability of the organization. So I think, first of all, there's true ownership and sponsorship for this capability. Secondly, I think there's a maturation of the environment, whether it's the data environment or the self-service enablement, to the point where now the attention shifts to how much leverage and value are we getting out of these investments that we've been spending, in some cases, decades on. And so I like to say data literacy is almost an insurance policy for how you're getting the value out of these investments. But then also, I think there's the broader digital context of, just what's happening in the world and the change, and especially in the last year and a half with, it becoming much more real that it is a personal skill of being able to interpret a chart and make a decision. And we've learned and seen that in our lives in the last year and a half. And I think it's just becoming much more present and prevalent in our work environment. So those are some of my, I guess, initial thoughts. I'm curious to hear what others think.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, Valerie. And Nick, if I may turn over to you, you've had a long service or attachment with the public sector. So what is your perspective on that question?
Well, I actually completely agree with Valerie. I mean, if you look back to the origins of this country, the United States, we've been collecting data. It's part of our Constitution that we have a census. And one of the major differences in this moment versus at the beginning of this country is that the access to information is much greater. So you can log on to a website today. Anyone can do it and find out how many people live in your city, state. That was not what we were able to do. We didn't democratize data at the beginning of this country. So I think the technological change, the ability to access information is so fundamentally different in the digital economy and the digital era that to me, that's like a headline issue. And when it comes to how government does the business of government, that's why this is so important in this particular moment. Everyone has a role to play in using data to improve government programs and policies. Recent legislation has been enacted to basically say as much, but we've also been tracking performance indicators and performance management for a generation. And we're now at this moment where we can actually do it much better. Our data quality is better. We're collecting information at a much higher clip, and the quality of that information is just so much stronger. So I think all of those things coming together, along with an enthusiasm of government improving continuously, the public sector always doing better and learning and improving, that's what makes this moment different.
Yeah, I can definitely appreciate and respect those thoughts, Nick. And I'm curious, as a follow-up, do we think that the last year of the pandemic that we have lived in, has the COVID situation and the pandemic situation kind of accentuated that need? And Eileen, maybe you or Ed, if you could weigh in on that question more from a practitioner's perspective, being CDOs.
Yeah, I can chime in. Yeah, most definitely. I think that certainly with the pandemic, the need for information and quickly getting data in the hands of leadership to make decisions about the economic recovery, decisions about reopening schools, decisions about many things. And the need for getting good quality, accurate information in those hands of the leadership was paramount. And now what's happened is that our legislature has seen that, and they've recognized that value and helped by creating new laws that are driving things. To the question about the importance within the government sector, public sector, things don't move very fast in the government world, right? It takes time to be able to kind of get some momentum and some initiative around that. And this is a big initiative. When you talk about bringing a chief data officer for an agency to restructure and refocus how data is being looked at, data literacy is key to help facilitate change management, because this is a change management opportunity. And again, you're working with individuals in government who don't change frequently. So you're trying to convince them of moving forward with a new technology, and in this case, a new process and a new real understanding of leveraging information. There's individuals that think if it's data, it's IT. The business area doesn't really need to be involved in it. But changing that paradigm, changing and shifting that helps with education and literacy, so that people aren't so fearful of the issues that are coming and change that is coming with the new way to look at information and data.
And Eileen, I saw you went off mute, so.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Ed. And I will say that really in the last year plus with COVID, it's really about data at the speed of relevancy. And I think that for a lot of our leaders, data has become personal. Like, do I go to work? Do my kids go to work? How am I going to manage the mission and get the mission accomplished when you have some speed bumps? And what we found is by using data, some of our readiness rates actually increased because it allowed us to really be laser focused on using data smartly to inform and drive decisions. And I think that that really makes us great stewards of the US taxpayers' resources. And so I really think that it's really been a great story in terms of data to support the speed of relevance.
Can I jump in on the COVID question too?
Please.
I mean, this is like such an important example over the last 15, 16 months where, we were confronted with this global challenge, including the data we didn't have that we knew we needed or wanted. And so it's like an interesting connection and nexus of, as we're talking about data literacy, why it's so important to understand what you sometimes don't have is also really important. The quality of the information that you do have, where there are gaps. We in the United States have a vital record system. Most of the audience here probably didn't know about that before the pandemic, but then when you open the newspaper every day, when you read about fatalities, we were getting data from that system. It was designed for annual reports. It was never designed for daily reports. So as we try to think about how do you use that information to do real-time decision-making for governors or mayors, or even at the national level, president, understanding that data was so critical to making decisions, gauging risk, communicating with the public. And that to me is a great argument for why this is so important to get right and why we have to focus on it.
Yeah, thank you for chiming in, Nick. And I want to go back quickly to what Eileen said. Data today is personal for each of us. And that couldn't have been more evident as it was during the year of the pandemic. I mean, just personally, like she said, I was looking at data and the numbers for whether my kids are going to school, what restaurants are open. It impacted each and every one of us. And I think literally took data literacy to a whole new level because, Nick, to your point, governors, mayors, and the president, all of these offices were showcasing, what the numbers are for each day, what the stats look like that. So I think it took data literacy to a whole new level. Yet, when I talk to other government officials, and in my personal experience prior as a government official, I still see that we're not at the level for the government workforce as we would want to be at. So let's kind of focus and pivot on talking about what are the challenges that you see, each of you see, from your perspective on what public sector leaders are facing when they are trying to get on with their data literacy programs. And maybe if I could start off with you, Valerie.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is getting your arms around this. So, Ed was just saying that this is really the kind of an edge to a larger change management initiative. And I almost hate to use change management because I don't want it to sound kind of, esoteric, but I do think that when there's something like data literacy that comes on the scene, there's so many different interpretations of it and so many different vendors that are engaging, and it feels very like, well, what is it and how are we going to use? So I think the very first challenge is just getting your arms around it and then knowing how to start in a way, usually with limited resources, but that you want to start in a way that is highly engaging, but also that isn't promising so much that you can't deliver either, right? So it's this balancing act of how do you frame it, how do you scope it, and then how do you really get started? I think one of the other challenges is how do you navigate all of the different messages and providers out there? So for example, with data literacy, the world of assessments, everybody wants to know, well, how data literate am I? Well, there's various assessments out there. How does someone who, has probably 4 hats they're wearing in an organization navigate all of the assessments, the courses, the, claims of the technology providers? So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Probably I'll just start there and I'm sure others can chime in. So scoping it, a pragmatic solution, and then navigating the landscape.
Anyone else had an opinion on that? I saw somebody went on mute. Eileen?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would like to emphasize the fact that it's really about starting small and scaling out. So Valerie talked about, don't overpromise. So I look at some of my initial strategies was really building a group of senior leaders that were my true data, change champions. But really making sure that the first use cases that we addressed, we started small and then took an agile, what I call secure data DevOps approach, where we consistently brought out more capability every 2 to 3 weeks so that people could see it maturing right in front of their eyes and they could see value in it. And that just helped create more change champions for us. So I think that it's really, everybody wants to start big, but actually starting small and scaling, I think is a really important step.
Ed, did you have a thought there that you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, Eileen hit the nail on the head with value. Is what type of value can you demonstrate and share and communicate? Priorities are hard. There's so much work to do and not enough people to do it. So all of a sudden you're bringing in this whole new structure and thought process around handling and managing and governing data. And it's really trying to identify those individual agencies or representatives who are going to be able to speak what you say. You're not the only one speaking in the room about it. Find your prophets, find those individuals who will help share the information. And then on the other side, what I like to do is share their success. I speak to the legislature and to other executive directors about what another agency is doing and how they're handling things and how they're leveraging data in certain ways. So I become a spokesperson on their behalf. And I basically share those success stories. The whole thing, and some of you might have heard me say this before, but patience and persistence are the two important qualities to work in state government. Because if you're not patient, it's not going to happen and you get frustrated and you leave. If you're not persistent, nobody cares about it. So you have to be the individual that continues to beat the drum and talk about the importance and the value opportunity associated with this whole program.
And I agree with that, Ed, with the patience and the persistence aspect of it. I also want to go back to something I heard from one of the speakers earlier around the use case and the business cases to be able to show that value. Where do you start when you're talking about doing data literacy just for data literacy? That does not always sell. So starting and identifying those right business cases or the use cases to bring on your leadership and the organization is important. Did anybody have a follow-up thought on that particular comment?
I might just echo to say I like the emphasis from Ed and Eileen about the value proposition and really meeting people where they are with good examples instead of, I'm guilty of this all the time, talking in the abstract about data. And it's sort of, you get lost in the vortex of all of the things that busy people are doing in the normal course of their jobs. So just that ability to cleanly explain, how can I actually help you? How does the data help you do your job better? I just think that's such a winning path. So, Ed, being able to take the stories and share them back that you're getting, I think is so savvy, and we should do that much more.
Celebrating success is always good, and sharing those stories resonates so well with the organization. Valerie, I see you have a thought there.
Yeah, I just want to amplify maybe with a couple of examples of, how to share those stories and successes. So, there's a few key value drivers or needs and drivers of data literacy that I continually see. One is clearly around upskilling, right? Upskilling the general workforce, wherever they're starting from and wherever they're upskilling to. And just gathering little vignettes or videos. So it's one thing to have Ed go around and sing the praises of others, but it's another thing. You can even just capture someone telling a story of how they've learned a new skill and they're using it to make a decision in a certain moment. So just capture like a little 3-minute video, no fancy production from marketing, right? Just a little video and have a little collection of those, a little gallery of here's how we're using different skills and data sets. similarly, data literacy is not just for the masses. It's also about how do we help maybe different teams to better collaborate. So there's the classic maybe data hoarding example. Well, you can, once people start realizing how data that they're sitting on is appropriate for a different context because they've been made aware of a different context, then there's an opportunity to unlock collaboration. And that is a function of data literacy. So just putting little spotlights on these little vignettes can be incredibly powerful and cheap to do, you know?
Yeah, that's a great point, Valerie. So kind of taking that back into the aspect of public sector and talking about, I think Ed touched a little bit on this, talking about some of the policies and the regulations that are in effect, either at the federal or at the state level. Nick, maybe if I could start with you to hear some of your comments on how are those policies and regulations either assisting the cause of data literacy or limiting our efforts for data literacy?
Yeah, so in sort of an ironic moment, while we were just singing the praises of starting small and building use cases, there are also these efforts that are really sweeping across the public sector right now to change the whole system at once and give everyone not just a nudge, but like a really strong shove. So a couple of years ago, Congress passed the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, or Evidence Act. It's come up a couple of times throughout sessions already today. And that created the role of federal CDO as a requirement of agencies and set up certain expectations at the federal level for data governance, data management, access and use, having evaluative functions, and the list goes on and on. And basically, if you summarize that entire law, it was about people and process to ultimately change the culture of government for better using data. Okay, well, you can't mandate culture in a law. You could try, you won't succeed. All you can do is set up the pieces. And I think much to how we described the various definitions of data literacy at the outset, that law sets a really strong foundation for the success of the public sector, at least at the federal level, to rethink how we conceive of and deploy the concept of data literacy in practice, all for the good of actually using data to make better decisions. So to your question, I mean, this is such a monumental moment for the federal government to begin not just educating and encouraging the use of data, but really like trying to get buy-in across the system and to what we were just discussing, build those good use cases, starting small. Even though the mandate is pretty sweeping, it still requires us to build capacity and infrastructure over time. So this isn't going to change everything overnight. But yes, I think that things like that can happen when you've got a Congress or even a state legislature that can send very clear signals. We care about this, it matters, and we expect you to do it. That's another way that we can really change the whole system.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Nick. Like you said, the Evidence Act and the Federal Data Strategy has some very straight action items on how to assess and how to upskill our workforce. So I want to turn it over to Eileen and give her a chance to kind of talk about, are there any specific examples you can share with the audience on how you are building up your data literacy program and how you're kind of working the action items that are mentioned in the Evidence Act? And
I think she looks like she had an internet connection issue.
Okay. And so maybe we can pivot over to Ed, and if you could share with us some perspectives of policy and regulations from a state government perspective. What are you seeing in your state and from the other states that you're working with?
Yeah, great question. So I'll talk about Texas here for a moment. We have the luxury of having opportunity to work with state legislatures during the session and help kind of, we don't obviously write law, but giving them some conceptual ideas around things that could help advance technology for the state, security for the state, procurement for the state, or in my case, data. And Senate Bill 475 was kind of a landmark product that was passed and signed by the governor this past session. And it provided, again, that foundation, that individual to be named as a data management officer to kind of move forward with the program. I think our efforts are going to accelerate in the next couple of months. And what was, I guess, what was information, a kind of a volunteer, or hey, I'd like to get some information about this. My phone is ringing, my email box is filled up. Well, one of the things we've done is start to build some products to help with literacy. Several years back, we adopted the DAMA methodology for the Texas framework. The book itself, if you've worked with the version, it's rather large. It's lots of great examples, but we wanted to create what we know is a Cliff Notes version, a fast start learning product, which is a data literacy product that talks about things from, why is this principle important? Who needs to be involved? When would you apply it? Etc. So the who, what, when, now, but we took it down to like 40 pages and a glossary. But this is a product, a tool that could be used not only by designated data management officers, but also for practitioners and also for leadership to provide them more education and information about the key components of a data management. So that's one element, and we've developed other things, small little vignettes and videos that basically highlight some of the things that Nick had talked about. But also, I think that the more tools that we can provide individuals, state agencies, the faster they come up the curve, and the quicker they can start the development of their overall program. And so that's my office. That's our goal. And that's kind of one of the major objectives that we try to build each and every year, to be able to help them become more efficient in their role, working directly for their agency.
Thank you, Ed, for that. And I want to commend you for the work that you're doing to kind of spearhead these data literacy efforts, because to the other panelists' points, it's a hard work. It's a lot of cultural efforts and cultural changes that you're trying to bring about with these efforts. So Valerie, if I may turn it over to you and see from your perspective, what are some of the other strategies that you would recommend to our audience to kick off their data literacy program?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, let's define what is included in a data literacy program, because I think there's a misconception often that a data literacy program equals training. And certainly training and development is a backbone to a data literacy program, but training alone will not accomplish the kind of outcomes that we're talking about. So what I like to do is I'd like to describe the program really in three pieces. So there's the development or the education piece at the cornerstone, but it needs to be bookend, if that's a word, by engagement and enablement. So engagement being, how are we weaving data literacy into community structures, into leadership behaviors? How are we supporting leaders and being good champions of data literacy? How are we weaving data literacy into existing communication structures? You notice I'm not saying create entirely brand new communication campaigns that are separate. The key to literacy is weaving it, right? Weaving it into, and giving the program a brand and an identity, and dare I say fun, right? Make it something that's engaging and personal and not, a grind, right? So that's the engagement piece. The other piece on the enablement side is, how are we scaling and sustaining this? It's one thing to say that we have courses and maybe we have some assessments, but you get scale when you can embed data literacy into the user experience, into the process flow. So for example, many of the technology providers, a Click, a Tableau, a ThoughtSpot, they have the ability to, when you hover over a data element, you display the definition in the lineage. So you're not asking someone to leave the environment and go find the data dictionary, right? Or preventing someone from putting time series data in a pie chart. So what I would encourage people to think about is, where can we get the scale through augmenting and automating decision-making as well? So those are some ways to think, but I would encourage people to think about the engagement strategy, the development and the training strategy, and then also the enablement and where you get the lift and the scale. I hope that helps.
Yes, that's very helpful, Valerie. And I think something that you said really caught my attention too, that this does not need to be done in a silo of its own. how do we embed this into an overall strategy and have a more holistic approach and with executive buy-in to make this something that the entire organization can focus on? So we're not thinking that we're just doing this training for something in a silo and kind of embedding it in day-to-day functionality. So kind of with that track in mind, I'm thinking, who in your experiences have you seen to be the sponsors of data literacy programs? And Ed or Nick, maybe if I can start with one of you, we're seeing that government officials are starting to lean in more and more to improve data literacy programs, but what kind of sponsorship do they need? Who are the key players? And then also start to think about who are we creating these programs for?
Yeah, from a overall sponsorship for the state of Texas, I consider myself the sponsor. Getting back to what I had said earlier about, being persistent and making sure people understand, because there are competing priorities and you're one of many. No one's sitting around with nothing to do. So you need to be able to have the examples, you need to be able to articulate and communicate it. A sponsor to me is one that could help set the overall strategic direction for where your data management program, your data literacy efforts are going. We're working here, my own agency, the Department of Information Resources. I'm externally focused, and we've hired a data management officer who's internally focused. So he is the champion and the sponsor for the efforts associated with our agency's program development. And I see these other agencies, when they bring on somebody or they designate someone, that he or she is that same individual that drives it and all the pieces, whether it be data sharing or analytics or literacy or just data management practices overall. So they're the individuals that help sponsor it. And obviously it depends upon where their reporting structure is. I get a lot of that question recently, is where should this individual report? But I think having a focus at the strategic level with an alignment to the agency's strategic goals and objectives is the best way to be able to place yourself in a role that people will understand and follow as you develop and execute. It's a long road, it's a long journey, but you've got to be able to keep at it. So hopefully that answered your question.
It is a long journey, and it just needs to be part of our day-to-day operations to make it seem part of life every day. So Nick, did you have a perspective from the work that you're doing at the Data Foundation and your work with other government officials? What have you seen to be successful in terms of sponsorship of these programs? And what have been some of the other critical success factors to make it successful?
Yeah, well, I would say we're learning a lot in real time in the federal government about who's engaging the most. And my hope and expectation really is that the chief data officers mature among federal agencies. This is increasingly part of their recognized responsibility and expectations even of themselves. But it's not just the responsibility of a CDO. And I would want to be very clear about that. We have a lot of other data users and managers across the federal environment, including federal statistical agencies, evaluation units, analytical enterprises, and maybe even the performance offices. I mentioned performance management earlier, and there's a whole separate role called the performance improvement officers. And I view this very much as an ecosystem, and we need the literacy component to be woven through that entire ecosystem and not contained as a single piece. And that includes the CDOs. And so a lot of the work when I'm describing the maturation of a CDO, it also involves collaboration across an agency enterprise. And importantly, even with those who are outside government. So knowing your external stakeholders and how to keep them engaged in participatory processes might also necessitate some outward-looking models for both supporting the actual literacy program, but then how you're operating all of your data management functions as well.
Thank you, Nick. And I think I see Eileen back on the conference here. So Eileen, if you want to kind of chime in on your opinion around who should be the sponsorship of data literacy programs in organizations, and maybe give some examples of how you are leveraging these programs specifically in your area.
I would say that it's leaders at all levels. So we have many different efforts or pilots going on in our organization. So one of the things that we did was we partnered with the Air Force Institute of Technology to have an online graduate certificate program in data science. But we also partnered with our Air Force Academy so that today our cadets that are studying, and when they graduate, can either major or minor in data science. Those future leaders will go into all mission areas, both on air and space. But it's not just about education. It's about short courses as well as long courses. And I think that the one that has really helped us really accelerate change is we started to run datathons where we would have commanders from the field put in problem sets, and we would pick one and we would work as a community to solve the answer. The first datathon was on the C17 scheduling challenge, which was a very manual process. And our award-winning solution were airmen that had never been assigned together from different mission areas virtually connect and come up with to automate that very manual process with a 92% accuracy rate. And that was in a 3-day datathon. So it was really about, and today that system is used by thousands of airmen every single day. So it's really about leaders investing and encouraging their teams to really invest in themselves. And so I don't think it's one thing. I really think it's a combination, because everybody learns differently. So you have to have champions at all levels, at the strategic and the tactical level, and really when you have those moments, to really accelerate the innovation.
Yeah, thank you, Eileen, for that. Valerie, over to you.
Yeah, I have to brag about one of my clients in this scenario, because I am so proud of the U.S. Department of Education. So I'm so inspired by Eileen's story, and I got approval to be able to share this story as well. And I think it's a great example of what's possible in a certain period of time. So I've been working with the U.S. Department of Education since last November. And when talking about the partners that they brought together to do this work, they identified, they have their CDO and their deputy CDO, they have their evaluation officer, they have their learning and development leader, and they had a data literacy lead. And those people actually went through a boot camp process with me at the end of last year. Now, if you remember, there were some kind of big things going on in the US at the end of last year, right? There's a lot of activity going on. And they actually went through the boot camp process to determine how to design their data literacy program. And they have already launched the data literacy program. And what does that include? It includes an engagement strategy, a homepage, learning paths, office hours, data literacy as part of onboarding new talent to the Department of Education. It includes working with a few of the grant programs specifically. So I'll be honest with you, when I started working with the department, I'm like, wow, I wonder how fast the government can move. They're one of my fastest moving clients. It is amazing. When you bring the right committed leaders together, the data officer, the evaluation officer, learning and development, and grant program leads who really care about this, it was amazing to me. They have already launched their program and they are off and running. So just shout out to the Department of Ed. You're doing an amazing job. And I'm so honored to meet both Ed and Eileen, other examples of great data literacy work. Great work.
Thanks for that shout out, Valerie. And I know this is such an exciting topic, and I'm loving the engagement from all the panelists, but I do want to be conscious of some of the questions coming in from the audience here. So maybe I can pivot over to some of the questions I see here. Should data literacy be tied back to data governance program to get traction? And if not, can you suggest the path to create a data literacy program? Ed, that kind of ties back to what you were talking about, the work you were doing with the DAMA. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think data governance is one of the core things, obviously, that everybody talks about and how to basically get started. So I think, we chose to create a literacy module, and it is training, right? It is that beginning element that Valerie said, kind of that center square. But from that, we hope that they will be able to leverage that within their framework that they develop for the agency. We're very decentralized here. So we provide guidance and recommendation, and then the agencies then apply it. So starting with data governance, because it is the core, I think, of a data management program, we took some time to develop some training, obviously materials, presentation materials, and then a video with some check your knowledge testing throughout. It was a great hit. We've sent it out to the community. And as we get additional individuals named, we'll send it out to them as well. And it is a great starting point. It helps get the traction going. But you always have to follow it up with something else, right? You have to have a next plan of what you're going to develop, how you're going to continue to keep the momentum going. I really like what was said in the last series of questions and responses about that. It isn't just a single individual that's responsible for literacy. It is really, it's everyone. But I really believe that the chief data officer drives the initiation of it. Again, they start it, and then from there, they kind of plant the seeds with people so that all of a sudden, you're successful when all of a sudden you don't have to talk about it anymore. Everyone's talking about it because it has become now common culture within the organization. And that, I think happened years ago with security. And I think data, at least in the public sector here in Texas, it's starting to get we're following the same path. And I think that's really important. So I know a little bit added on that question, but certainly I think it's a critical component to add into the data governance and data literacy at the same time.
And Ed, just to have a quick follow on there, I hope that we reach that point where we don't have to talk about it anymore and it becomes just part of our culture. And then maybe we'll come back all together and have another topic or talk about our success stories on this topic next time.
Absolutely. I'll have the stories for you. So.
Yeah, celebrate that success. Eileen, this one might be for you. Is data literacy both to provide technical language and understanding for leveraging tools and science, as well as non-technical business value and data storytelling?
Absolutely. I think that it's not one thing, it's all of it. And I think that's why it's critical to really build a foundation. So Ed just talked about his approach for his team for data governance training. We've done something very similar where we have created a boot camp to create a foundation for all of our data officers that are in our key function areas, as well as in our major commands and field activities, kind of to build a baseline to build from. So it's really not about one thing. The storytelling piece is really critical because when data is your strategic asset and you need to invest and protect it. And so that storytelling part is really a critical piece to really make sure that you're really dealing with it as Nick called it, an ecosystem. And so it's not one thing, it's all of these composable business objects working together to build a ecosystem over.
Thank you, Eileen. Valerie, I see you unmuted, so do you want to chime in there?
Yeah, this topic of language as an underpinning of the literacy movement, the data literacy movement, I think is the golden key to unlocking this. And here's why I say that. Sometimes people hear the term data literacy and they think it's all about data or it's all about math. That's usually like the reaction that phrase can invoke. But really what we're talking about is the language of three sets of terms: business acumen, data acumen, and analytical acumen. And unless we clarify that, then our business or agency stakeholders don't realize that they are an equal player in the language. So what we want to do is make sure that when we're talking about data literacy or data acumen or data proficiency, that we realize that the language is actually business data and analytics, and everybody brings something to that party. I actually gave that language a brand called ISL, Information as a Second Language, because I think it's so important as an underpinning that this really is a language. It's the reason there are translators and why we get into this belief that we need to forge literacy is it really is a language. We haven't recently called it a language.
I like that a lot, Valerie, on ISL, and I followed that work for a bit. Nick, this question might be for you. Is there such a thing as a right time for a data literacy program, especially with respect to the public sector?
Yeah, yesterday. I mean, this is such an important moment for everyone's digital acumen, right? And the longer we wait to get started, the further behind we might actually find ourselves. This has come up a couple of times in the discussion already. Government, in many cases, is not known for being particularly fast. So with the expectations at the federal level and new legislation, the federal data strategy has come up a couple of times here, that this is the moment to get started. If anyone's listening in here and you're working in a federal agency and nobody's talking about data literacy, like, you can also be a leader. You don't have to be the CDO. Anybody can begin this conversation and ensure that it's trickling both up and down the chain. So up to the CDO and other senior leaders, but also to subordinates. And the most junior people in the organization also need some aspect of data literacy. So I guess what I'm really just saying is, why wait? Let's get started.
And I completely echo those sentiments, Nick. I mean, we should have already started. I think every agency does not need its leader to get started on it. And back to Eileen's point, at any leadership level or any level of the organization, you should be able to get started on that effort. So if anybody's listening and has not started on that journey, let's go. Next question I see here is, how long does a data literacy program take, and how should we think about timing and planning? Eileen, do you want to take that?
Sure. What I tell my team is that this is an emerging field, which means that it's constantly iterating and improving. So I tell my team that if you want to be a data leader, you've got to be committed to lifelong learning, because there is always going to be a new capability, a new tool, a new data set to get smart at, a new AI or machine learning technology. It's really a field for the bold and for the curious, because it's not about, oh, I finished school. It's really about, I started my journey, and I literally call it my team's data leadership journey, because it is a journey. And most of us that are on the call, we just, we didn't start here. We all started someplace else, but because data was part of our core DNA, this is how we ended up here, and we're passionate about it. And if you're passionate about it, I'm excited to work with people like that, because it's about a beginning. There's always going to be something cool emerging, etc.
Excellent. And with that, I think we are coming close to the end of the discussion. I think they're all in agreement that data literacy is a more than powerful agent in government's data transformation journey. And if we haven't started on it, it's time to get started now. With that in mind, I would ask each of our panelists to maybe give me one sentence answer as an advice to other data leaders and listeners who are in the audience today that may be just starting off on their data literacy journey. Where should they start? What is your advice to them? Let's start with Ed.
I think one of the foundational things I've done here in my program is really foster collaboration, network, partnership, learn from each other. We've brought people together from disparate agencies who have helped other agencies. There's some people, obviously in the health industry, health agency rather, who've been really good at what they do, but they've also taught some of their skills and experience to others. So collaboration, I think, is an extremely important thing when you go to look at building your program out.
Great piece of advice. Thank you, Ed. Valerie, may I ask you next?
Yeah, I just think get clear on what you're solving for, right? Just be really clear on what you're aiming at. What does great look like in this scenario, and don't go it alone. There's no reason. You've heard several stories here today of people that have done this and are doing it. So I like to say Google searching data literacy is not a strategy. You know, reach out to any one of us. I'm happy to take a call and just help route you to some resources. And you've got resources internally, I'm sure, that you can leverage. So happy to take a call and point you in the right direction, but do not start from a blank sheet of paper. Not necessary.
Thank you, Valerie. Eileen, may I have your comments, please?
I agree. We like to say that data is a team sport. And I think my colleagues here, we all agree. It's how we use each other's great work to springboard and accelerate change, because we are really start small and build your culture of collaboration, build your change champions, and you will go faster than you ever thought was possible.
Thank you, Eileen. And last but not the least, Nick.
Yeah, I guess I would just amplify what you're hearing here and say, you know, you can plan to build the whole airplane, but you still have to start with a nut and a bolt. So start small, get some wins, build your allies, find your friends, and keep it as a team sport. I think that's the best way forward.
Excellent. Well, thank you for those words of wisdom. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your thoughts on this topic. And it was a discussion that I could continue to have throughout the day. I'm sure the audiences loved it. And let's pass it on to the next session. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aditya.